Kicking off this list with number 8, Thor Love and Thunder. Oh boy, how the mighty have fallen. I find it so appalling how fucking terrible this movie turned out to be. Instead of calling it Thor Love and Thunder, you might as well call it Thor Love and Blunder, because the entire movie feels like a complete blunder. I just will never understand how Taika Waititi went from making Thor Ragnarok to making Jojo Rabbit, which is possibly his best movie ever, and then he makes this piece of shit. Like, I just can't even wrap my head around it. After Thor Ragnarok, it seems like Taika Waititi was given all the creative freedom in the world to do whatever he wanted with Thor Love and Thunder. But instead of telling a cohesive story, he decided to turn this movie into a complete comedy. And oh boy, is it so dreadful. Almost all of the jokes and humor in this movie are so painfully unfunny. It's like the equivalent of watching Amy Schumer's quote-unquote comedy skits, which are so agonizing to get through. With this movie having such an atrocious story to it, Taika Waititi decided to turn every single thing and everybody in this movie into a complete joke, including the character of Thor, who comes off to be an intellectual, goofy dumbass. Even going so far to make jokes about Jane Foster having cancer. It's like, why? Why would you find somebody having cancer to be funny? To the cringy performances from Tessa Thompson and Natalie Portman, and of course, the god-awful CGI. Christian Bale was probably like the only redeeming quality about this movie, but the way he was just so underutilized was just downright infuriating. And it's just like, how? How do you manage to waste Christian Bale, who is a masterclass actor? I could honestly keep going all day about this, but overall, Thor Love and Thunder absolutely sucks, and it pretty much represents everything of what's wrong with the current state of the modern MCU. Number 7, Shrek the Third. Now, I think most of y'all will agree with me when I say that the first two Shrek movies are undeniable classics. With the first movie being so creative because of the way how it pokes fun at all kinds of different fairy tales without going too overboard and eventually becoming a huge pop culture phenomenon. Shrek 2 was a fantastic follow-up as it became the epitome of how you should make a great sequel. And as for Shrek the Third, man, this was a humongous downgrade. It seems like all the charm and the charisma of what made the first two movies so great is completely gone, rather than it came to the terrible plot, the annoying characters, the poor music choices, and the abysmal jokes. Fiona's father dies in probably in the most insulting way possible. Prince Charming completely fell flat as the main antagonist in this movie because the way he's basically treated like a butt monkey. Even though I did understand his motivations because he wanted revenge for the death of his mother in the second movie, but it just doesn't work because the way he comes off like a spoiled brat. And probably the worst of all is the way they completely bastardized the character of Shrek in this movie by making him look like a complete imbecile and look like he was unwilling to fit to be king. And then they decided to have him faded to the background so that way the entire plot would revolve around the character of Arthur, Fiona's cousin, voiced by Justin Timberlake. And it's just like, There may be a few good scenes here and there, but overall, Shrek the Third is insultingly awful, and it's by far the worst entry in the Shrek franchise. Number 6, The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1 and 2. Now, I will never forget how huge the Hunger Games movies were during my time in middle school. The movies were so popular that it not only helped usher in the teen dystopian genre, but it would also kickstart other movie series from Divergent and The Maze Runner. The first movie felt like a huge breeze of fresh air as it focused on the actual Hunger Games and the central story of Katniss Everdeen, played by Jennifer Lawrence, who superbly captured the strong-willed yet caring nature of the character. The movie was a critical and commercial hit at the box office, and it would catapult the career of Jennifer Lawrence to new heights as she immediately became a household name in Hollywood. The second movie, Catching Fire, would crank things up to 11 as it would raise the bar high, as it would expand upon everything that came from the first, and overall just being the best movie of the entire series. However, when it came to the Mockingjay movies, Now, just to be clear, the Mockingjay movies are no by means bad, but when you compare it to the first two movies, they were just kind of boring to me. Why, you ask? Well, the fatal mistake that they made was splitting the Mockingjay movies into two parts. I get it was a very ambitious choice to make, but the execution just didn't work. Mockingjay Part 1 was easily the weakest as it had less action and was just packed with way too many filler scenes that just felt so unnecessary, a handful of new characters that were so underdeveloped, the pacing was poor, and the cinematography felt too drabby. And while Mockingjay Part 2 was a slight improvement, but yet again, all the problems from Mockingjay Part 1 is on full display in this one, and by the end, the series just didn't leave me with a great deal of satisfaction. It just left me with just shrugging my shoulders and just saying, saying, meh. By the time the series ended with Mockingjay Part 2, movie audiences already had lost interest with the series. Box office numbers, while still pretty good, were slowly dropping. And because of this, it marked the beginning of the end of the teen dystopia genre, which unfortunately had already died out by 2016, which left the entire Hunger Games series ending on a very, 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 very bland note. Coming at number 5, Wonder Woman 1984. Oh man, I really wanted Wonder Woman 1984 to be good because I absolutely loved the first movie. It's one of my favorite comic book movies of all time, and I remember watching it in theaters and having such an absolute blast. It exceeded expectations as it proved that female-led superhero movies could be successful. After various delays, I finally got to see it during Christmas time in 2020, and I remember walking out of the theaters and saying to myself that I thought it was okay, but upon rewatching it several times for like the past 2 years or so, I've come to realize that it's just not good. With the first Wonder Woman movie having such an intriguing fish out of water story, with having such a great theme to it, along with having so many thrilling action sequences, including the infamous No Man's Land scene, it seems like Patty Jenkins decided to take like a more campy direction with this movie that had such a janky script, a muddled story, to the clunky pacing, and even the lack of action. And it just really makes me question, how the hell did Patty Jenkins go so wrong with this? Now, of course, there are things that I do like about this movie. Gal Gadot, as usual, slated as Wonder Woman. Her chemistry with Chris Pine was just as good as it was in the first. And I thought Pedro Pascal was thoroughly entertaining as Maxwell Lord. I don't think Wonder Woman 1984 is quite as terrible as people make it out to be, but considering what it should have been, it completely floundered. Number 4, Suicide Squad. Oh look, another DCEU movie. What a coincidence. After Batman v Superman left me utterly disappointed, which I will get to in a little bit, I was really hoping that Suicide Squad was going to be a huge upgrade, and well, nah, it managed to be just as bad, if not worse than Batman v Superman. Now, to give credit where credit's due, this movie has some pretty fine performances. From Will Smith as Deadshot, to the amazing Viola Davis being superbly casted as Amanda Waller, and of course, the best of all, Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, who was easily the highlight of the entire movie. She completely owned the role of Harley Quinn. But the entire movie as a whole was just a complete clusterfuck. There were various things about the 2016 Suicide Squad movie that just failed on so many levels. From the way they introduced characters multiple times, which makes no sense, to the poor interactions, having so many character arcs gone to waste, to the sloppy direction of the story, and even having shitty villains like Cara Delevingne's Enchantress and even Jared Leto's Joker. The only good thing that really came from this superhero bomb fest was the 2021 Suicide Squad movie directed by James Gunn that came out 5 years after it, saving its premise for a director who actually had a vision, unlike David Ayer. Number 3, Jason Bourne. Now, I absolutely love the original Bourne trilogy. All 3 movies in the trilogy are great because of the way how each entry just got better and better, with thrilling action sequences that are just simply outstanding, along with having an intriguing story from start to finish. With the Bourne Identity, it was such an excellent start to the franchise, introducing us to the character of Jason Bourne. The Bourne Supremacy was a great follow-up to Identity as it just cranked things up to 11. And with the Bourne Ultimatum, it's easily, to me, the best of the bunch as it marked a very satisfying conclusion to the series as a whole. But then the Bourne Legacy was released in 2012, 5 years after the Bourne Ultimatum, which featured a different character played by Jeremy Renner. And I didn't hate it or anything, but it just kind of makes me question, does this movie have any business even existing? Next thing you know, it was confirmed in late 2014 that Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass would be returning to do a 4th Jason Bourne movie, and honestly, I was pretty stoked. Damon and Greengrass strike gold with the Bourne Supremacy and the Bourne Ultimatum, so I had every reason to be excited. Jason Bourne was finally released in the summer of 2016, and I remember seeing it on opening night, and I remember walking out of the theaters with my head hung very low because it was just so painfully bland. I don't think the movie is particularly bad, but the entire plot just felt so unconvincing and so convoluted, and it just felt like a compilation of copying so many action sequences that we already seen from the previous 3 movies, and I'm just like, why though? You couldn't think of anything else to do? The second reason why it was so disappointing is that the character of Jason Bourne doesn't feel like the main protagonist and feels more like a side character, which is weird because the movie is titled Jason Bourne, but Nikki Parsons for the most part felt like the main character for like the first half of the movie, even though she eventually gets killed off, unfortunately. And by far the most disappointing thing about this movie is that they completely removed the amnesia thing. The whole thing that drove the entire Bourne series was the whole amnesia part, because that's what made the character and the whole story of the entire trilogy so interesting. But once that's gone, it just feels so lifeless and just doesn't really have anything going for it. Instead of calling this movie just simply Jason Bourne, you might as well retitle it The Bourne Redundancy, because that's what this movie feels, redundant. As a whole, the movie just felt unnecessary because it does little to justify its own existence. It felt like a mediocre cash grab, and I just really wish they would have been better off ending with The Bourne Ultimatum, which is honestly the more fitting conclusion to the Bourne series. Coming at number 2, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Oh look, a third DCEU movie on my list. My god, the DCEU is such a hot mess of a franchise. Now look, I am aware that this movie has its defenders, and if people generally love Batman v Superman, then, that's cool. Mazel tov to you. Me, however, I've never been a defender of this movie, nor will I ever be, because nobody can convince me that Batman v Superman is a good movie. Why? Because it is absolutely stupid. I mean, seriously, how does anybody manage to screw up a movie when you have Batman and Superman going head to head? They're two of the most iconic superheroes of all time, and this was supposed to be the epic showdown of the century. But what did we get in result? A 2.5-hour movie that was just a pile of nonsense, that was overly grim, full of character butchering, creating a shit ton of plot holes, cramming in various classic comic book stories into one movie, having way too many supporting characters that either come off to be dull, unimportant, or just downright unlikable, a terrible script, and also having this infamously stupid scene.
You're letting him kill Martha!
Stop! Please, stop!
Why did you say that name?
It's his mother's name! It's his mother's name.
So just because both of their moms' name is Martha, they automatically become friends? It's like, who came up with this shit? You see, Batman and Superman are polar opposites of each other, with Batman representing dark and cynical, and Superman representing hope and light. However, when it came to this movie, both of them are presented as dark, gloomy vigilantes with very questionable moralities, which completely ruins the whole point of their rivalry, which makes it feel very forced. While I do think that the performances from Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill were fine, but the problem is just the way how their characters were just so badly written. Not to mention the fact that they have really pitiful villains, whether they came to the Doomsday Monster, and especially Jesse Eisenberg's atrocious performance as Lex Luthor. I know a lot of people always say that the Ultimate Edition is better, which, a little bit, but not by much for me, because I also don't even like the Ultimate Edition either. If I can name a few things that saved this movie for me, was the infamous badass warehouse sequence, which is easily one of the best Batman action scenes of all time, if not ever, and the introduction of Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, who was easily the show stealer of this 2.5-hour pile of dog shit. Batman v Superman should have been so much more, but instead it was just a hodgepodge of sloppy ideas just sewn in together, causing permanent damage to the DCEU. And while I strongly considered putting this at my number 1, however, that would be reserved for. And coming at number 1, the Star Wars sequel trilogy. I don't even know where to begin. I really just don't. Just how in the entire fuck did they manage to screw this entire trilogy up so bad? Actually, I take that back. I know why. Because they didn't have a plan, which makes no sense at all whatsoever. Now, I might be in the minority when I say this, but I generally love The Force Awakens. I know a lot of people like to crap on it now just because the way how the entire sequel trilogy panned out, but I really like the adventure in that movie, and that's a movie that I'm willing to defend till my dying breath. However, with that being said, to be objective, looking at this entire trilogy as a whole, it's like each and every single entry that comes after the last just doesn't really feel like a proper continuation. And that became very clear in The Last Jedi, which is by far not just the most divisive Star Wars movie, but one of the most divisive movies of all time, because the way how it completely divided the fan base, all in the name of quote-unquote subverting expectations. After that, things just go from being very complicated with The Last Jedi to being downright awful in The Rise of Skywalker, as it's very clear that that movie was just done to please all the critics that didn't like The Last Jedi, but it fails miserably at doing that, as the movie became the textbook example of how you do fan service in all the wrong ways possible. There are just so many things that are just downright frustrating about this entire trilogy, from the way they destroy or kill off legacy characters, to so many plot threads getting axed, to so many unanswered questions that never get resolved, to the way how so many new characters of the trilogy just go to waste, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to be one of those Star Wars fans that just automatically dick rides the prequel trilogy and act like they're great just because they hate the sequels, because the prequels aren't even that good either, well, with the exception of Revenge of the Sith. Even despite its missteps and how they were poorly executed. At least all three movies were planned out because they were all directed by the same man who created the entire franchise, George Lucas. All I'm trying to say is the Star Wars sequel trilogy had so much potential. It had so much potential to be great. It had such a very promising start to it with The Force Awakens, but due to the lack of direction and poor planning is why the entire sequel trilogy resulted to be nothing more than a bloated, sloppy, inconsistent clusterfuck. It's just so upsetting the way how Kathleen Kennedy and the people at Disney decided to just completely ruin everything of what makes Star Wars so special. They had so much source material to work with, but then they decided to just completely start from scratch by doing things their way, by sticking it to the fans rather than just take inspiration from it. It's just so unfortunate the way how the entire sequel trilogy turned out to be the way it was, and now I'm sad.